Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The conference will begin shortly. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Tin Yo, Chairman, ASEAN Federation of Plastic Industries, AFPI, and Secretary General of the Myanmar Plastics Industries Association, MPIA. Mr. Calum Chen, Secretary General of ASEAN Plastics Forum, APF, and Honorary President, Malaysian Plastics Manufacturers Association, MPMA. Kun Virat Klopatitnon, Secretary General, AFPI. Honored AFPI and APF leaders from Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the 19th term AFPI and 31st APF Virtual Conference 2021. The conference this year has the theme Business and Sustainability Outlook for Asia. Throughout the presentations that you will be hearing shortly, it is hoped that the conference could help the plastics industry in Asia to prepare for what lies ahead upon recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in the areas of economy and market outlook, as well as challenges in the plastics sustainability. Today's conference is brought to you with the generous support of our sponsors, ICIS, Independent Commodity Intelligence Services, who is also a knowledge partner of the conference, Messe Düsseldorf, the organizer for K, the world's #1 trade fair for plastics and rubber, and Petronas Chemicals Group Berhad. Once again, our sincere thanks to our sponsors for your support. To begin the conference today, let me run through the etiquette or rules of the conference. You would have noticed that we have muted and turned off video for all participants. This is because we are using a conference platform on Zoom, and this feature is activated to ensure no disruptions to the speakers during the webinar. Participants may ask or post questions related to the presentations in the chat box during the conference. The speakers will only answer questions that are clearly written and based on the presentations. Kindly refrain from marketing your goods and services in the chat box. Kindly also refrain from posting comments or remarks to questions posted in the chat box. The chat box is only for queries related to the presentations. And lastly, the organizer reserves the right to remove participants who run afoul of the conference etiquette. It now gives me great pleasure to invite the chairman of AFPI to deliver his address. Dr. Tin Jo is the chairman of AFPI and is also the Secretary General of the Myanmar Plastics Industries Association, MPIA. He is the managing director for one of the largest petrochemicals trading and distribution companies in Myanmar, and he has vast experience, network, and knowledge about Myanmar and the ASEAN petrochemicals market. He also has a passion in recycling and environmental conservation. Dr. Tin Jo, please.
Good afternoon, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, our AFPI and APF friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Tin Jo, Chairman of 19th term AFPI and also the Secretary General of Myanmar Plastic Industry Association. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be a part of this conference and to get a chance to find and share solutions. As we all know, COVID-19 has made a lot of changes to our life. One very impactful change is on the perspective of plastics by the world. People seeing more importance and uniqueness of plastics in terms of sanitary wares, medical apparatus, protections, water resistance, and so on. We cannot argue that there's very few alternatives until today to replace plastic in such special areas. At the same time, the negative impact of needing to dispose such sanitary and protective materials in such rate and volume has never ever seen before. Plastic has become an inseparable part of our modern life, and at the same time, plastic waste is an important issue to our modern world. Plastic is seen more, the world is more clear about undeniably competing interests, and we cannot deny that sustainable actions and creative solutions are needed to face such challenges. Forum Life APF is an ideal moment to highlight and share innovations, creativities, diverse perspective on plastic technologies. Breakthroughs in recycling and supply chain of post-consumer waste has become more crucial than before. That's why in AFPI, we are working very closely with our regional friends and partners for common policy on recycling and importation of plastic waste, common action plans for environmental issues, and common database on plastic waste. As countries differ on how we address and handle topics like waste collection and waste management and treatment, special players like APF play a vital role to find common grounds and share the best possible solutions, not only within ASEAN region, but also at a global level. So I hope all of our participants today joining this year to have an enjoyable and productive day, sharing ideas and taking back actions to where they are most needed. Without further ado, let's start this wonderful forum with commitments to make a shape a greener and better world with plastics. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tin Jo. Next, I would like to invite the Secretary General of APF to deliver his address. Mr. Calum Chen is the Secretary General of APF since year 2000 and is also the co-chairman representing Asia in the Global Plastics Alliance, GPA. Amongst some of his long list of roles include the Honorary President of MPMA and the President of Malaysian Consortium of Mid-Tier Companies, MCMTC. Mr. Calum Chen, please.
Thank you, Crystal. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's make it very friendly, very informal, and everybody learn from it. First of all, Dr. Tin Jo, Chairman of the 19th term APF, API and to all our distinguished speakers, to our AFPI and APF members. Good afternoon again. When we came up, first of all, I hope that everybody stays safe and that you and your family are safe from the pandemic. And I think this is of utmost importance. Other than that, all other things are secondary. When we spoke about this conference, we were wondering, what kind of relevant theme can we put to it? How can we give take-home values to our members? Ladies and gentlemen, it is not just coming for another conference. There's so many webinars, so many, and then many of us mostly left the conference feeling that we have not wasting our time, but not really gaining what we came here for. So when I'm also very glad that, between Kun Viraj, the Secretary General of API, and myself, Callum Chen, as the Secretary General of Asia Plastics Forum, we work very close together. We work on the team where you look at business and sustainability outlook for Asia. And more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we're also very happy to note that both our secretariat, the API secretariat led by May Metavi and the team, and the APF secretariat led by Sujata, complemented by Crystal and the team, work very, very closely together. And this is where we find value working as a team. And it's not just doing a job, but finding meaning in their profession, in what they're doing, and coming up with something that people will appreciate. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, after every crisis, after every pandemic, after any war, there will be a lot of opportunities. There will be big shortage in the market for both raw materials as well as for finished goods. So how can we start benefiting and profiting from this as the economy rebounded from this COVID-19 pandemic? First of all, we'll have to accept that COVID-19 is here to stay, with or without the mutations, until it becomes endemic. So the next thing is, once we accept it, what can we do to benefit from it? And that's why when we spoke about this today, we felt that it is very important that as business people, the economy is very important, not just in ASEAN, not just in Asia, but more importantly, in the global scenario. And who else but to get a banker, an experienced foreign banker, who knows what's happening around the world, to share his opinion with us. And of course, the next thing is to look at Forex, where as trading nations and as trading companies, whether we are buying or we are selling, the US dollar as the common denominator is a very important factor. So it is very important that we get someone who really understands, and not just understand, but is an expert in this, to tell us the trend of the US dollar, whether it's going up, down, stable, or whatever. And of course, I would like to thank Standard Chartered Bank, and in particular, Mr. Abra, the CEO of SCB, Standard Chartered Bank Malaysia, for supporting us and getting both his experts to present to us today. And other than this, I think all of us will also agree that raw material, whether it's plastics, it's steel, it's iron, it's wood, rubber, anything, forms a very important and integral part of our costing. And we need to understand what's happening in the world, what kind of supply situation, whether there are any planned, unplanned, maintenance, the demand and all that. And of course, getting someone who's an expert in this to talk about the supply chain, the trends, is also very important. And we are very happy and we are very fortunate to have the strong support from ISIS, where Ms. Malini would share with us on what's happening on the ground and moving forward, what to expect. And another point which we have to look into again, of course, the German, is the environment. Recycling, the 3R, sustainability, CO2 emission, decarbonization, and we talk about ESG now, environment, social governance, and all this. And this is where I'm also happy to say that we have Ms. Chen Jiahui, who is also from ISIS, who will share with us on all this. And moving forward, we want to make sure that, and because plastic is so popular, it's so important, it's also creating a lot of so-called pollution issues. And again, I want to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, it is not that paper, metal, glass is not an issue. It's just that when, because of its weight and all that, it sinks to the bottom of the river, it sinks to the bottom of the sea and the ocean, and people don't see it. And what you don't see, you don't complain. But because plastics is so vibrant, it is so, fantastic that it floats on the surface. And when people see all that, it becomes a big issue. And this is where we also got, Dr. Cheong, to come in and talk about the climate and plastics from the academic point of view, what needs to be done and what you think of all that. And what we'll do, ladies and gentlemen, AFPI and APF will continue to collaborate and not just providing a platform, but bringing in relevant subjects, and more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, relevant speakers. Anyone can talk about any subject, but we need good people who understands and who can see the broader picture to give us the perspective on what is happening on the ground and moving in future. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you for participating in today's conference. We hope that you will have a good time, enjoy, and more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, have take-home values, which all of us will feel that we are not wasting our time, but that we are getting from it. And Viraj and myself will promise you that we will bring many, many more good speakers, relevant subjects for all of our future combined meeting. So come and support us in big numbers. Thank you. Back to you, Crystal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calum Chen. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for today. He is the Managing Director of Popular Interplast Company Limited in Thailand. He is also the Director of the Federation of Thai Industries, FTI, and a member of the Board of Directors of the Plastics Institute of Thailand. He also currently serves as the Chairman of the Plastics Industry Club, FTI. He is the Secretary General of AFPI, Kun Virat Kleopatinon. Before I invite Kun Virat to take over the session, we would like to request for our speakers and moderator, distinguished guests, and the Secretariat to turn on your webcams so that we could take a group photograph. So please kindly turn on your camera, and I will do a quick countdown. So everybody ready? 3, 2, 1. One more. 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you so much. Thank you all. With that, without further ado, please join me to welcome Kun Virat as the moderator for today's conference.
Let me introduce two other speakers. The first one is Malini Hariharan, has over 20 years of experience in the chemicals industry and is currently the Market Development Director of APF from ISIS. She drives ISIS's market development strategy and engagement to showcase ISIS market insights and closely tracks and analyzes chemical industry developments with a special focus on Asia and the Middle East. She started her career with Indian Petrochemicals Corp, IPCL, in India, engaged in sales and marketing of commodity, polymers, and chemicals. And another speaker is Tan Jia-Hui, is an analyst in ISIS Global Plastics Recycling Team, overlooking Southeast Asia and the larger Asia Pacific region. Her work includes building and maintaining ISIS mechanical and chemical recycling, supply tracker database, and interpreting market trends, amongst the other. As a contributor to the Asia APF and RPE price intelligence reports, she focuses on the regulatory nuance of the region, tracking legislative developments and developing Asia knowledge bank on the subject. Jia holds a bachelor degree in international relation from the University of London. May I pass the floor to first to Malini. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. I hope you're able to see my screen. So at the outset, a big thanks to the organizers for having ICIS come in to deliver our market insights. So over the next 1 hour, we will talk about the virgin polymer market and also what is becoming increasingly important, the developments in the recycled plastics space. I'll start off by giving an overview of what's been happening in the markets this year. And at the same time, I'd also like to share with you all what 2022 is going to look like, especially if you keep in mind the key price drivers, the drivers that shape the markets this year. You will see that there is a QR code on the screen. So for those of you all who would like a copy of the presentation, you can scan this code, or you could also drop an email at apacsales@icis.com, and my colleagues will get back to you. So for my presentation, I'll just start off by giving the big picture, zoom in then on the polyolefins market, PVC. For those of you all who have been buying PVC, you'll well know the turmoil that was there in the PVC markets, with prices hitting record highs and persisting at these high levels for much of this year. So the key question, I'm sure, at the back of your minds is, what is next for PVC? And then I'll conclude the session by talking a bit about ABS and how the markets are actually transitioning into an interesting phase. You could almost say that a perfect storm hit polymer markets in 2021. And some of this, that the storm was emerging, some of the signals were actually evident from the second half of last year. Because what you saw was both demand and supply fundamentals getting really rocked during the year. Starting from H2, as economies reopened after the first wave of the virus, demand started coming back into the market. In some cases, the demand was actually faster than anticipated. And that could be also because some new demand patterns started emerging. With people spending more time at home, working from home, online shopping took off, the takeaway food culture grew. People started equipping their home offices, buying laptops and furniture. And all of this, of course, then triggered a demand for a number of those end-use segments that plastics gets into. So while on the one side you had demand increasing, you also had supply constraints building up in the market. And in fact, at the end of last year, for many of the polymers, we actually we ended last year with markets fairly well balanced. And then we had weather-related disruptions hit the market. So first off was the polar storm in the US Gulf Coast. That brought down a whole lot of capacity. In fact, nearly 90% of US polypropylene output was affected as a result of that polar storm. More recently, you had the hurricane coming in. And then on top of this was the maintenance shutdowns that were taking place and other sporadic plant outages happening in different parts of the world. So that meant the demand and supply balance, was quite tight, especially in certain parts of the world. And I'll talk a bit more about this in my coming slides. And then the logistics issues. You heard about this in the previous presentations. Availability of containers, very high freight rates, port congestion, long lead times. All of this meant that the usual trade flow of these polymers was affected, and it created these dislocations in the market. And these are very interesting, and they also, in fact, contributed to some of those price trends that we've been seeing. So let me start off by talking about the polyolefin side of the business. So when you look at polyolefins, and two key factors really affecting the markets in Asia. One is the cost push coming in from the feedstock side, and the second is the absence or the very limited volumes of US exports of PE in Asia. So the chart here, the price graph, is for high density polyethylene blow molding grade. And the dotted line shows the average price between 2015 to 2019. And what you can see here, that prices across India, Southeast Asia, and China, they steadily started climbing up from the second quarter of last year. And in the case of India and Southeast Asia, they actually have gone up below that 5-year average, while in the case of China, it's hovering at around that 5-year average level. There have been dips in demand of polyethylene this year. Especially we saw that when the Delta wave hit both South Asia and Southeast Asia earlier in the year, the lockdowns that got introduced, that affected demand and trading in this part of the region. Looking at the second chart, which looks at the exports out of the US. Now, all of you all know that the US has been investing very heavily in polyethylene capacity for the last few years. And therefore, there was definitely an anticipation that we would be seeing some very regular, large volume inflows of product coming into this part of the world. Because after all, Asia, led by China, is the biggest importers of polyethylene. But in fact, if you look at the trade data year to date, you do see that for high density as well as linear low, there's been a double-digit decline in US exports to Asia. And also the low density polyethylene exports have also gone down. So what's been happening is, we saw that disruption, the big disruption to US production taking place in Q1. Plants did recover post that. Initially, the US producers focusing very much on rebuilding the inventory pipeline. But additionally, they were also more focused on meeting domestic demand. Domestic prices were way above the prices that were in Asia. And as you can see on these two graphs over here, there was plenty of premium that was available for US producers to sell in the domestic market rather than export product out to Asia. So this then was also a contributing factor to that dislocation of trade that we've been seeing. I'd also like to talk a bit about low density polyethylene, because as some of you all, those who are participating in the low density polyethylene market, I'm sure you're aware about this widening price spread that we've started seeing between low density and linear low density. So historically, the average spread between the two polyethylenes has been under $100. But it's climbed significantly this year. And part of the reason has been to do with what's been happening in the EVA market. So we've been seeing some very strong demand pull coming in for EVA. EVA going into making the encapsulant films that are used to make solar panels, the solar seeing a big resurgence in China. So that pulling EVA prices skyrocketing. And what that meant was for some of those plants that can swing between LD and EVA, the focus then was to maximize the output of EVA. So EVA LDP spreads, which used to average around $400, has widened significantly. It's gone to well above $3,000 this year and has even surpassed the previous high that we had seen. This was way back in 2011 when the spread between EVA and LDP had crossed about $1,000. Now, besides EVA, of course, the other factor influencing LDP was that some of the plants, they faced shutdowns. There were outages that were taking place, maintenance shutdowns, and that too constrained the availability of low-density polyethylene. We do expect that given these high prices, there will this year probably be a moderation of LDP demand, and we are not anticipating very high growth coming in for LDP. However, having said that, for next year, we do see this widening spread between LD and LLD slowly correcting. There are new plants for LDP that are due to start up, as well as new plants for EVA. And once these plants come online and the volumes, commercial volumes get available, we should see some correction in these spreads. So I made a reference to how the logistics issues have dislocated trade and affected the trade pattern. And as a result of this, we've seen some very wide price spreads develop across regions. So the chart here shows the LLDP prices across China, Europe, Latin America, and Turkey. And you can see here that a significant delta coming across, say, China and the European prices. What this has also meant is that where possible, producers have tried to sell more into the regions that have the highest price and therefore which offer them the highest netbacks. So in that sense, Asia has not been the favored location simply because the netbacks were not as strong as some of the other regions. But we have to keep in mind that these netbacks are on paper because eventually what really mattered was the availability of container space and also the freight rates. Some of the other factors have been on the demand side. Demand did come back to the market. However, what we've also seen is that packaging has been the big driver when it comes to polyethylene demand. Overall, for the year, we are seeing slower demand for polyethylene this year in China. LLD, we expect, say, around a 4% growth. High density, we are expecting probably negative growth this year. There's been a big push on sustainability and circular economy in China, which means that the HDP film segment has been affected, and that's going to be hurting the overall demand for HDP in the country. Moving to polypropylene, some of the factors that affected the polyethylene market are common across to polypropylene. And as with polyethylene, you will see that there's been a significant gap between Asian prices and prices in other parts of the world. US prices, as you can see here, at record highs. One of the additional features of the polypropylene market was the big surge in capacity that we've seen in China. China is on a major expansion program, not just in polypropylene, but also in polyethylene and many other chemicals. So in the case of polypropylene, their self-sufficiency ratio has actually increased, and it's gone up to a point where they have started exporting product. And starting from the second quarter of this year, there have been some very competitively priced export offers that have come out of China. In the case of polypropylene, the other factor that I'd like to highlight is the very fragmented nature of demand recovery. So while we did see some good growth coming out of packaging, and that's supporting the overall polypropylene market, but if you look at other segments such as, say, auto, which was hit by the global shortage of semiconductor chips, which meant that auto companies had to cut back on their production, and that then affected polypropylene, especially copolymer demand this year. One of the questions that we often get asked is, will Chinese exports continue? What is the outlook then for China's PP exports? So yes, these are most likely going to continue, simply because China, as I said, is on a program to expand its capacity. Next year, we anticipate that capacity growth of about 11%, this year about 13%. And if you look at the kind of consumption growth, 7% this year, and 6% next year, it does show that capacity growth is outpacing demand growth, and therefore there will be increasing participation in the export market. This is going to result in some new market dynamics. It's going to create new competitive pressures for the producers and also the major exporters to the Asian market. So this year, as I said, big jump in Chinese exports, some 200% plus increase. And if these new plants start up on schedule, then we can expect growing presence of China in the export market. So what is then our forecast for both polyethylene and polypropylene going forward? One, we do expect that the flow of US polyethylene into Asia will resume. So these exports out of the US will start. We are, however, expecting crude oil prices to remain high. So our forecast for crude is slightly over $70 for next year. Economies will recover, although of course the big question around future waves of the pandemic does remain. As the supply chain issues ease up, we're also going to see more demand coming into the market. We're going to see some of these wide price differentials across those regions shrink over the next year. Our current view in terms of pricing is that we do expect that, given that cost push, both for LLD especially, the prices next year, the average prices are likely to be higher, slightly higher than this year. And same is the case for both high density polyethylene and also for polypropylene. So let me turn now to PVC, and many factors actually shaping the PVC market. Let me pull all of them at one go. The big climb in PVC started in the second half of last year, especially when Hurricane Laura hit the US. That tightened supply. And then as the logistics issues, supply chain issues started getting more and more entrenched into the wider global business, that gave that further boost to PVC. We had nearly, we had a lot of PVC capacity that was hit again in Q1 of this year, And then nearly 57% of US capacity was offline due to Hurricane Ida just a few months back. The dual control policy in China, which affected the operating rates of some of those PVC plants in the country, that brought in a shortage in supply. Although now we have started seeing some easing in prices. Overall, the Chinese government has taken measures to ease that pressure on coal prices, and also the dual control policy implementation has eased, as a result of which there's greater supply now of PVC in the market. And so in the recent weeks, we have seen some stabilization of prices coming in. It's also important to understand how the market is structured globally. So we see here Asia playing a very important role in the market. Northeast Asia is the biggest consumer, led by China. We've got India as the biggest importer in the world. Indian PVC demand was hit badly last year, and this year there'll probably be some recovery, but we're not expecting significant growth to come in. As I mentioned, that 2021 was a year of supply disruptions for PVC, primarily in the US, but it has also extended into Europe, where several major producers they had to declare force majeures, and this is on top of the usual turnaround. For India, they had to therefore then depend on Asian cargoes to service their demand, and this is until the point where the US exports can resume. So the good news is that the supply tightness in the US is actually easing, and production rates are coming up. So in fact, October production in the US, it's climbed up back to the highest level since January. Exports out of the US are also increasing, the export volumes. With power availability improving in China, that means Chinese supply is also improving. And in fact, even in Europe now, we have started seeing some softening coming in their export prices. India's demand, given that they are the major importer in the world, their demand is going to be increasing in Jan. This is the typical demand season. There are new capacities also coming up for PVC next year, and that could actually help ease the global supply crunch. I'd just like to point out to these two charts over here. The chart on the top shows, gives you a view of how much of PVC capacity was affected by the outages as well as regular maintenance shutdowns. The outages are the bars, the red colored portion of the bars. And the blue bars represent the additional volumes that are going to be entering the market. So as you can see here, heading into next year, we have, if these new plants start up on time, we will see some additional supply coming in. Now, one of the other things to also mention here is that given this very sharp rise in PVC, in some segments of the market, in India, for instance, some of the buyers, end users have started looking at polyethylene pipes. So in comparison to PVC, the price increase for HDP has not been as significant. And so we are also hearing of some shift in demand taking place, and this could have some longer term implications for PVC as well. So let me move on to ABS now. As you can see on this graph here, ABS prices running well above the 5-year average. And in fact, ABS prices, average prices Jan to October this year are nearly 50% above the average price for last year. So what's been happening is that you've got the demand pull which came in from the second half of the year from appliance and autos. You of course had the supply side issues as well. Demand, especially from auto, has eased this year. However, the other factors such as the feedstock cost push and the logistics issues have meant that that's given some support to ABS and prevented prices from really collapsing. Overall, heading into next year, we do see some correction taking place in ABS prices, but prices still remaining above that 5-year average level. I've talked a bit about the cost push that's coming into ABS, and the graph on the left shows the month-on-month increase, percentage change in the prices for not just ABS, but also its raw materials, styrene, acrylonitrile, and butadiene. So you'll see here that prior to April of this year, with the exception of a few months, there was steady and in some cases strong double-digit push coming in, cost push coming in for the ABS producers. Look at acrylonitrile, where prices in the month of March went up by as much as 50%. But post-April, you will see that for most of the months, there's actually been a correction taking place in the prices of these raw materials. So if you look at the producers' variable margins, you will see that the margins have come down from the highs that were experienced in 2020, but they're still above the average margins, both for integrated producers as well as the standalone producers, meaning producers who have to buy in the styrene, acrylonitrile, and butadiene. So I talked of some of the big transformation taking place in the ABS industry, and there's on the feedstock side, we're going to be seeing a number of styrene plants starting up, some due at the end of 2021, mainly in China. These could be pushed back into 2022. We are hearing of delays. Acrylonitrile and butadiene markets, which were very imbalanced in the early part of this year, we are projecting that they'll be better balanced next year, and therefore the average price levels would be lower. On the supply side for ABS, there's going to be rapid capacity expansion taking place in China. Nearly 1 million tons of new capacity is there in the pipeline. Again, don't rule out delays. Anywhere from 6 to 12 months have to be factored in. This means that we have to keep an eye in terms of the startup of these plants. On the demand side, after that very robust demand in 2020, we saw that moderation creeping in this year, with the chip shortages affecting production. Additionally, there's also been some bit of substitution effect. So where high ABS prices for certain applications have prompted a shift from ABS into HIPS. So in conclusion, there are always risks to any forecast, and quite a lot of these risks are based on what is going to be happening to the wider economy. We heard a lot about this in the last two presentations. We are expecting the supply chain issues will be sorted out, although the most recent outlooks that I am hearing from market participants is that it's probably going to be only after the first half of next year. So sometime in H2 when we're going to be seeing some easing of the supply chain issues. At the same time, on the flip side, you've got the high energy and oil prices, the big boost that came to the Chinese economy last year that started moderating now. There are inflationary pressures across the world, which raises the risk of higher interest rates. The fresh waves of the pandemic cannot be ruled out. And even as countries want to live with the virus, there may always be a knee-jerk reaction to introduce some form of the lockdowns or curbs in activity, which could hurt polymer demand. And also not to rule out the fact that, a couple of years of high prices could also, hurt overall demand growth and cause some application shifts. So that wraps up my presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, there is this QR code. If you're interested in a copy of the presentation, do scan it or drop us an email at apacsales@icis.com. I'll now pass to Jiahui for her presentation on the recycled plastics industry.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Is my screen sharing all right?
Yes, all good.
Okay, right. So thank you, Malini. Hi, everyone, for joining us today on a Thursday afternoon. My name is Jia Hui, and I am an analyst in ICIS's Global Plastics Recycling team. So I'm based in Singapore and overlook Southeast Asia and the wider Asia Pacific region. Okay, in this session, I will be sharing about the polymer recycling developments in Asia, including an overview of the current policy landscape, opportunities and challenges in both mechanical and chemical recycling, as well as some analysis from our recycling supply tracker research. To understand polymer recycling landscape in Asia Pacific, we first have to understand the policy landscape. Asia's plastics recycling has always been known to be fragmented with no harmonized legislations. The issue of plastic pollution often met with knee-jerk reactions. Examples would include the sweeping bans on single-use plastics that we see across the region, as well as the response from waste exporting countries towards China's national salt policy. In many instances, these sweeping bans on single-use plastics lead consumers to alternatives which may not be more sustainable. And this quick move to exit from virgin plastics are usually not followed by any alternatives or investments towards the supportive infrastructure to produce alternatives in larger volumes, and therefore exposes the absence of a thorough strategy towards banning single-use plastics. On the issue of the national salt policy, waste exporting countries reacted to China's ban by redirecting their waste to Southeast Asian countries. And this resulted in many Southeast Asian countries implementing import limits, some even bans to deal with this influx of waste. So 3 years after the national salt policy, the effects can still be felt in order to develop recycling capabilities. Many governments and industry are investing into the value chain. For example, would be Australia and the Australian government setting aside a dedicated recycling modernization fund to boost their domestic recycling capabilities. And in addition to bans and also bans on export, we also see industry-funded investments from VCs like Circular Capital and cross-sector organizations like Alliance to End Plastics Waste. And all these catalyzes the infrastructural upgrades for more production capacity. So with more recyclates available, brand owners can then incorporate more post-consumer recycled plastics into products and their packaging to achieve their sustainability targets. So this brings us an overall regional direction towards plastic circularity. This overall commitment towards regional circularity can be further seen in the recently announced Plastics Pact and also the ASEAN Action Plan targeting marine debris. So if we see the Australian, New Zealand, and Pacific Islands Plastics Pact, the ANZ Pact was launched in May 2021, while the India Plastics Pact was launched in September. And these pacts, together with the Regional Action Plan, Asia Pacific will be able to look forward to cooperation across borders and supply chain, and also perhaps harmonized guidelines and national standards in terms of collection and also the recycling infrastructure. So the ANZ Pact, in line with all other national and regional Ellen MacArthur Pacts in the Plastics Pact network, as well as this India Plastic Pact, will work towards 2025 joint targets, which includes an average of 25% recycled content in plastic packaging across the region, and also to increase the amount of plastic packaging collected and effectively recycled by 25% for Australia and New Zealand and 50% for India, respectively. While the policy support and planning component of the ASEAN Marine Debris Plan aims to conceive a guidebook, which includes guidelines for countries to phase out single-use plastics and also harmonize regional policies on recycling, as well as plastics packaging standard, and strengthen regional measurement and monitoring of marine debris. So these roadmaps for action have the potential to fundamentally transform this region's response to plastic and to accelerate the implementation of best practices across the value chain. With the Plastic Pact making the largest difference via signatories that include major brand owners and FMCGs. So while Australia and India have plastic pacts, that is not to discount the progress made by other countries. So in this slide, we see a summary of the statuses of policies and approaches towards plastic waste in the Asia-Pacific countries. Just by looking at the colors, you can see that Australia is having the most mature policies across the value chain, from banning single-use plastics to export restrictions, mandatory recycled content in packaging, to deposit return schemes and EPR schemes. Whereas Southeast Asian countries, we can see that we are beginning to look at bans on single-use plastics and also to implement EPR schemes. As of 6 October, India has issued a policy requiring plastic packaging material producers to collect plastic products for recycling before 2024, and to also ensure that subsequent supplies of packaging contains recycled plastics. So this shows and emphasizes India's commitment to plastic recycling and their move in allowing the incorporation of recycled plastics into products, as compared to previously, which can only be seen in the state of Maharashtra and not the whole country. So if we look at Philippines, the House of Representatives have also reported to vote unanimously on July 28th this year to prohibit the production and import and sale of many single-use food packaging products. So if this bill goes on to pass in the Senate, then products like non-compostable plates and cutleries, EPS, products like straws, stirrers will have to be phased out over the next year. With policies tackling plastic waste and supporting recycling, we expect to see an increase in recycling capacity, which is definitely validated from our research when building our mechanical and chemical recycling supply tracker. So over here, we see Asia Pacific's recycling capacity from a global point of view. The chart on the left side shows the cumulative capacity for mechanical recycling, and the one on the right side shows that of chemical recycling. As seen, Asia Pacific's mechanical recycling experienced tremendous growth over the last decade, especially more so post the national swap policy, meaning from 2018 till now, exceeding even that of Europe and North America's growth. And we have identified over 700 recycling facilities in the region with the capacity to process over 20 million tons of collected plastics a year. In terms of chemical recycling, however, the industry in APEC is still in early stages of development, with a number of factors contributing to the relatively steadier start, including poor waste collection rates in rural areas, and some countries prioritizing other pressing domestic issues such as marine debris. An interesting observation can be made if we were to look at these two charts from another perspective of the timeline. So mechanical recycling dominated the industry over the past decades as the need to achieve plastic circularity grows and technology advancement. Chemical recycling is starting to grow, and you see this development over the past few years. While it's still a bit early to predict what the future of recycling looks like in terms of market share and also the prices, it's fair to say that chemical recycling will become an important part of plastic recycling. So one question remains, however, is the current global capacity that we see right now enough to achieve sustainability and regulatory targets? In the context of longer term goals, our outlook on virgin consumption in 2025 and 2030 will only increase. Hence the need for substantial growth in recycled supply. So if we look at achieving 50% recycled content in PET, for example, the growth rate we need would have to meet 82% per annum, while for PE and PP, the growth rates are between 50 to 70% if we are looking at an average recycled content of 25%. So in our opinion, it is chemical recycling should be developed in tandem with the established mechanical recycling industry in order to achieve these industry targets. A key challenge to the growth of this recycling industry would be the lack of a cohesive and enabling environment. So let's look at Australia versus India, for example. The ANZ Pact, the Plastics Pact, will be operating in an environment with supporting policies and well-managed waste management, while in India's case, the India Plastics Pact will be operating in a slightly more challenging environment compared to Australia because of the lack of mature policies and also slightly lacking in terms of the waste management system. As we see here, India is also a net importer of plastics waste that indicated by the blue line, the dark blue line, whereas Australia has a different approach of banning export waste to enable domestic recycling and boosting the local recycling industry. So other factors include the lack of mandates requiring the use of PCR, as well as brand pledges that haven't really penetrated the market. On top of the recent tight bill supply and high freight costs, they also contribute to this less than ideal environment. So if we look at the global FMCG targets that's supposed to be achieved by 2025, we can see that brand owners are still a distance away from achieving their ideal targets. So conversations are circling around regulations and supply. So looking at this chart based off the Ellen MacArthur Progress Report, we can see how much they progressed, but also how much more is needed in order to achieve these targets. Companies have committed to using up to 50% rPET content by 2030, some by 2025, and many are calling for a change in Asia's policy to allow recycled plastics in packaging for food and drinks. So they are also looking for solutions, and a challenge would be sourcing sufficient supply of these high quality recycled polymers. So this is where the recycling value chain in Asia Pacific comes into play. The value chain in APAC, specifically Southeast Asia, operates a bit differently from the other regions in the world, especially the informal sector. So this figure is an overview of all of the stakeholders, and it summarizes what happens to waste after consumption. So while the value chain may differ slightly between the countries, these stakeholders and their relationships are common throughout the region. One thing worth highlighting would be the informal sector, represented by the dark blue portions, which will be responsible for most of the material recycled and collected in Southeast Asia. So these materials are recovered usually from places without collection coverage, Some may include collection coverage, usually from curbsides or water bodies, and these informal sector activities also extend to landfills and dump sites, which are then sold to junk shops and aggregators, which will then go for recycling. So these type of material recovery usually depends on the prices offered as well as the market demand. Also showing us that there is an opportunity to tap here into the informal sector space to meet the demand for recycled polymers in the region. And if we take a look at the feedstock characteristics for mechanical recycling in the region, we can see that PET is the most collected and also most recycled feedstock, with approximately 55% of the share in this region, followed by PE and PP at 28% and 17% respectively. So 76% of the feedstock collected comes from post-consumer waste for rPET. And the reason why most of these materials are post-consumer is because in APEC, the informal sector is responsible for the collection of these materials, whereas post-industrial waste, on the other hand, are usually traded on a B2B level. So for example, FMCGs may be able to contract their own recyclers to collect and recycle back their own products. Okay. So amidst our research for the upcoming recycling supply tracker for chemical recycling, we have mapped out a non-exhaustive map of current chemical technologies and projects in APEC. Developed and technology advanced countries like Japan, Taiwan, China, Australia, Singapore, we see them on the list. Yet there are also a handful of projects in Indonesia with the West Javan government, as well as Thailand and India. So the average capacity of these plants vary between about 20 to 30,000 tons. Recently, there are announcements of up to 50,000. So PET refined tech is at 22 kilotons working with PET. And there's also one in Singapore, Environmental Solutions Asia, producing 20 kilotons with mixed plastics as feedstock. So there are much more capacity as well as new technology set to come online. So our research have identified over 200 projects globally, ranging from pre-commercial stages of laboratory demo plants to operational plants. And the three main technologies we identified are split into thermal depolymerization, chemical depolymerization, and solvent-based purification. Without going into detail of the type of chemical recycling technologies used, their differences and their feasibility, just in APEC alone, we see pyrolysis projects making up majority of them at 55%, followed by glycolysis at 25%. So as we talk about chemical recycling as new technologies facilitating higher performance and added value, is it really a game changer? With high expectations from the industry for chemical recycling to achieve much higher volumes of production of significant volumes for high quality applications, it needs to overcome some mechanical recycling limitations. This technology currently is more tolerant to mixed waste streams in the sense that it has the ability to process mixed plastics of lower quality, as well as the plastics can be theoretically infinitely recycled and therefore subverting mechanical recycling tensile strength challenges. Chemical recycling technologies have also been highlighted as viable solutions for high value recyclability, especially harder to recycle packaging types such as the multi-material flexible packaging. However, as investment scales up, so has criticisms. Multiple NGOs criticize the environmental impact of chemical recycling, arguing that the material that is chemically recycled further back than a monomer should be considered waste to fuel and technically not defined as recycling. And if we see Ellen MacArthur's Foundation's global commitment, this definition aligns as well, meaning that if these processes are used for plastics to energy or plastics to fuel applications, these activities cannot be considered as recycling. However, this definition does not seem to impact chemical recycling operations in Asia as much as the EU and the US. But there is growing argument on whether chemical recycling should count towards waste targets of countries. Yep, so therefore, although in its infancy in Asia, chemical recycling has a real scope for rapid expansion, judging from the activity from the refiners through to consumer-facing brands in the form of pilots, partnerships, and investments in Asia Pacific, if we do not look in terms of the definition. And chemical recycling is definitely able to scale in the region when more companies have access to developing technologies and have access to a steady source and supply of feedstock. Many existing players have entered the market via joint ventures and have also invested in technology providers, as I've seen with the recent numerous press releases. Establishing a steady feedstock supply by developing more collection infrastructure should also be looked into, as there is a potential of chemical recyclers competing with mechanical recyclers for feedstock. Cost is crucial in terms of scaling, and margins should be identified for all stakeholders, while scaling can only be expedited with collaboration across the chain. So last but not least, clearer regulations in terms of the usage of and also contributions of chemically recycled recyclates into targets will also provide greater affirmation and clarity to companies that are looking to scale. So looking at chem recycling, it may seem like it is the solution to increase the supply of recyclates. However, we recognize that it takes time before it achieves industrial scale. So while there is great progress in chemical recycling plants coming on stream, current chemical recycling outputs are not enough to be able to make a significant market penetration. So based on what we found, many operational chemical recycling plants in Asia will not drastically increase supply if we look back at the size of the virgin markets. So comparing about 20 kilotons versus the size of virgin markets. So mechanical recycling is still key in terms of recycling post-consumer plastics and producing post-consumer resins, and will continue being the central solution focus for brands and packaging suppliers attempting to meet their 2025 targets. And we see chemical recycling's maturity and timeline likely to reach industrial scale in 10 years' time. So to summarize, apart from new technologies like chemical recycling that will facilitate sustainability in packaging, forces like multilateral governance, and also a change in a country's approach from building to exporting to self-sufficiency, as well as innovations in materials like bioplastics, they all play a part. And demand is currently outpacing supply. The recycling system, both mechanical and chemical, are currently unable to deliver the supply of recycled materials. And therefore, we must exponentially invest to improve collection, optimize collaborative participation, and to also improve processing efficiency, while also addressing the longer-term structural issues in Asia Pacific. So thank you all. That's the end of my presentation. Similar to what Malini mentioned, feel free to scan the QR code if you would like to keep in contact with us, and also for a copy of the slide presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malini and Ms. Jia Hui, for the presentations. Ms. Jia, all right. Before we begin the Q&A session for this section, in appreciation to one of the other sponsors of the conference, which is ICIS, Independent Commodity Intelligence Services, We will now play ICE's corporate video.
Global markets are moving faster than ever before, and the trading of resources is increasingly more complex. Each year, tens of trillions of dollars of energy, chemicals, and fertilizers are consumed. The petrochemical industry alone adds about $5.7 trillion a year to the world's GDP. Demand for these goods has almost doubled over the past 20 years and will be the largest driver of global oil demand in the coming decades.
At ICIS, our story started 149 years ago, and we exist to connect data, markets and customers to deliver a comprehensive, trusted view of global commodity markets. We help some of the world's largest organizations trade more effectively, invest more strategically, and source and deliver goods around the world.
At ICIS, we collect, create and maintain the most comprehensive data and insight on the petrochemicals industry, covering 180 commodities, predicting the opportunities of tomorrow.
More than 250 market experts and analysts report, forecast and analyse the market daily, utilising satellite imaging, monitoring 12,700 refinery streams and 11,500 petrochemical plants. Data predicting import volumes of the world's LNG cargoes and monitoring shipping flows worldwide in real time. We analyse over 100 million data points a year to forecast power prices in 29 countries, forecasting every hour until the year 2030.
We have grown each and every year since the Relics acquisition in 1994. 44 million tonnes of plastic was recycled globally in 2018, a figure predicted to get 5 times bigger in the next 10 years as some of the world's largest companies and governments make sustainability pledges. ICIS is the first to deliver insight and analytics for 3 of the world's most commonly used recycled plastics, and that is just the beginning of our ambitions. In bringing that transparency and trust, we are helping our customers source recycled products in the volumes they need it, where they need it, and as efficiently as possible, shaping our future.
In fast-moving industries, we are serving over 6,000 customers across 132 countries to develop a comprehensive, transparent view across commodities, prices, trade flows, and supply chains. We are shaping the world by connecting markets to optimize the use of the world's most valuable resources.
Thank you once again to ICIS for supporting the conference, both as a sponsor and a knowledge partner. So I will now pass the session to Kun Virat to start the Q&A session. We will address those questions from the chat box first before addressing those who have raised up your hands. So Kun Virat, please.
Thank you. Thank you. This first question is from the chat box. Is to Malini. The first one is India PE prices when comparing variance against Southeast Asia and China are on the high side in 2021 versus 2018 to 2020. Could you please share why?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, that this year has been a year of dislocation of trade, the trade flows especially, and that has resulted in these widening of the price spreads across regions, and especially countries like India where imports into the country got affected. So without adequate imports coming in, and also some domestic tightness because of plant shutdowns. And then we also had a period where there was some uncertainty in the country in relation to introduction of new quality standards, what were known as the BIS quality standards. We also had the depreciation of the Indian rupee taking place. And as a result of which the import volumes got affected. And that then created this dislocation in terms of the Indian pricing versus pricing in other parts of the world. Additionally, for the typical exporters into India, like the producers from the Middle East, there were better netback options available from pushing product out into markets in Europe, right? So which meant that, in terms of volumes that they had to prioritize, yes, Indian prices were higher than maybe Southeast Asia, but equally not as high as prices in other parts of the world.
Well, there are lots of questions for regarding recycle. This is the second question is to Jiahui. The question is regarding recycling capacity. Could I get the rough percentage separation between polymers in the region? For example, PE 50 or PP 30. Etc. etc.
So yeah, I believe this is Daryl's question. Definitely, we do have such breakdowns across the regions because we have teams based in Singapore as well as teams in the Europe and also US. But unfortunately, the slides that I shared today is only for Asia Pacific. So feel free to reach out to us via either the QR code or drop us an email. We can take this conversation offline and also separately. Yeah, definitely we do have such information available.
Okay, so the next question is to Jiahui again. How much of the mechanical PCR material available in Asia is certified PCR? And is there an incentive or pressure for recyclers to get certified?
So based on the research that we've done, most of the recyclers in Asia Pacific do have the GRI certification. A lot of them do not only stop at the GRI. So a lot of recyclers in Asia Pacific that wants to be able to supply to brand owners, especially FMCGs and F&B companies, they go for the FDA or the EFSA certification. So those are the ones that we actually keep track of and also show on our mechanical recycling supply tracker. Yep, so we actually look more into the official approval, so FDA, EFSA certification. But if you're looking, or if you're a recycler that's looking to get certified, there is currently, I would say, no pressure for the GRI certification, but definitely everyone's rushing to get a piece of that, to be part of that food grade certified market. So that's the FDA and the EFSA certification that people and recyclers are looking to get themselves certified in.
Okay, thank you. Another question to you again.
Yes.
The cumulative recycling capacity in Asia outpaced that in Europe. Is there a geographical breakdown of how many percent in China, India, ASEAN, and other parts of Asia?
So if you're looking at the graph that I shared just now, which you should be able to see once the video is being uploaded, yeah, half of that cumulative capacity comes from China. The next is India at about the next 20%, and the rest would be from ASEAN, North Asia, from countries like Bangladesh, yeah, and Pakistan. So China makes up half of it. Similar to the point raised before, if you want to know the breakdowns or in terms of charts, then definitely please do reach out to us. We'll be able to share our other slides. That's not shown in this presentation, but we do have them. Yeah, so please do reach out.
You have so many questions about recycling. Another one. Is there any flexible packaging converter success to produce retort recycled packaging?
By flexible packaging, sorry, what is retort recycled packaging?
Retort, that means that the pouch that.
Oh, that, okay, sorry, there's different terms used. Yeah, so in terms of flexible packaging recycling, we see more of that happening in the chemical recycling space. So for mechanical recycling, I think for recyclers themselves, it does not make much financial sense to actually develop the technology that's able to, separate the different layers. But in terms of chemical recycling, because firstly, it is gaining traction. Secondly, it shows the technical advancement and the expertise that you have as a company. Much more companies, especially in Japan and Korea, they're looking towards chemical recycling as a solution towards flexible packaging and recycling.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe that is the actually is a mix of a multi-layer type of product. So you probably need the chemical recycling rather than mechanical anyway. Well, that's all the questions from the chat.
Viraj,
I'm going to pass on to you.
Viraj, I raised my hand. Okay.
Yes, I'm going to pass on to you. Okay, go on.
We are here to learn.
Kalam, yes.
Jerry, thank you, Viraj. Jerry, thank you for the comprehensive presentation. If chemical recycling is the way forward, what would an average startup cost? Okay, and how much recycled material would you need in order to make this project viable? And if this is the way forward, why? What is the impact on the environment? Why should NGOs be complaining about it? Thank you.
Okay, very controversial questions. Yeah, but thank you for those questions. Yeah.
Straightforward, controversial. You see, it's the way. Yeah.
Yeah, so from my personal opinion, yeah, chemical recycling definitely, I think, will be the way forward, especially those technologically advanced countries, Japan, Korea, they all want to show that they are able to take this mechanical recycling industry forward to the next level. Yeah, but I think in terms of, let's say, Southeast Asian countries investing into chemical recycling, I think Southeast Asian countries might have to consider a few other factors, such as whether or not this is the pressing issue at the moment, or whether chemical recycling is indeed the market to be investing into when there are other pressing issues like ocean-bound plastics, actually fully maximizing and reducing the process losses in the mechanical recycling streams. So there is a bit of gap actually between the Southeast Asian region versus the North Asia region in terms of plastics recycling. Just looking at mechanical recycling alone, there is a bit of that gap to fill, which Southeast Asian countries, if you see on that chemical recycling slide that I showed just now, there's only about 1 or 2 plants in pockets of the Southeast Asian countries versus you look at Japan with like 15 projects coming up. Yeah, and then Korea, there's 7. Yeah, so in terms of amount of investment sum needed, that definitely depends on where you want to build that plant, the geographical location of it, whether or not you have an entire ecosystem that ecosystem and also off-takers, whether you have that supply, that all these agreements have to be planned out before you know that sum. So depending on the technology type, the location, the type of partners that you have, the investment sum differs. So yeah, I think it's better not if I put a number to that. Yeah.
Joey, sorry, I'm talking about the plant investment. Don't talk about the land, don't talk about all the partners first. What kind of money are we talking about? 50 million, 100 million, 20 million US or whatever. At least, what would be a startup cost and what is holding back? If it is the way forward, it should not be controversial. And what is holding back?
So based on our research, based on just Asia Pacific alone, we see investments from 50 million to 1 billion USD. So this differs in terms of the output. So 50 million would be about 20,000 tons per year output for pyrolysis. Yeah, but if you go up to the 1 billion, you can see maybe 50,000 to about 100,000 pyrolysis oil being produced. So this is just pyrolysis alone. We're not looking at other technologies, gasification, glycolysis, all of that, because in APEC, pyrolysis is predominantly the current technology that we see. So we have more information on that.
What would be the ROI? Assuming you're able to fit all the machine, let's say 50,000 tons a year, and with 100 million US investment, what would be the return on investment? How long will it take? I mean, I'm asking this question because at the end of the day, if we think this is really viable, then we should then go and approach our government and tell them what needs to be done. Of course, the next question is, are we able to collect so much waste? You know,
exactly.
But what would be the ROI, assuming we're able to get all the waste, be able to get the land, get the right partners to work as a team?
I think talking about ROI is a bit far-fetched right now, in my very personal opinion, because all these plant announcements that we've been seeing, they are usually feasibility studies, just I think few months, half a year into operations. We have not really seen the supply chain and also the value chain develop around these initial announcements. So we have heard challenges that these recycling companies face of not getting sufficient off-takers. They're not sure where the end markets are not developed yet. So the off-takers are not that ready to take that first step to use such a product. Let's say pyrolysis oil is being developed. So yes, on one hand, companies do want this first mover advantage to announce that we are investing in this technology. We have such plans coming up in the future, but to be very frank, the end markets are not developed sufficiently in order for current companies to know what the ROI is. So we have also spoken to market players that have expressed concerns in the technology type that they invest in. So pyrolysis being the leading in inverted commas technology in Asia Pacific, people feel more safe going into pyrolysis. But the other technologies, it does not mean that there are more cons than pros. It's just that the market, especially end market, is not developed yet for us to tell at the moment.
Viraj, one last one. Our Japanese partner are very willing to share on all technology. So why can't we just look at Japan? It's not like they have only 2 plants. They have 15 plants, and they've been doing it for a few decades. So why don't we learn from them? And they're willing to share. I think that's the most important thing. So why can't we look at that? Right? Why reinvent the wheel and learn from ourselves when our partners are willing to teach us? Not just sharing, they're willing to teach too. So holding back. And Japan being a country where they're very, very concerned about the environment, which is very good. You know, I'm sure they've done all that, because if there's something that is detrimental to the environment, I'm sure the Japanese would have objected to it from day one and not continue to have 15 plants and still growing. Would you agree on that, Jerry?
I actually disagree. Yeah, so in terms of environmental impacts, let's just move away from chemical recycling for a while. Let's say bioplastics. So Japan is also quite huge on bioplastics. They are investing heavily in PLA, and China right now, PBAT production in terms of capacity. But what is the true environmental impact of either PLA or PBAT? I don't think, personally, based on just observations, I think further studies could actually be done to understand the real impact on the environment, and also not just on the environment, but let's say the subsequent waste management infrastructure, and also the end of life management and processes of these capacity that's being put out into the market right now. So I see countries and brands going into this with a very good intention, but it's not sufficiently thought through for the end of life management side of things. So that can also be translated back into the chemical recycling market.
Thank you. I think it's for the sake of the time that we'll have limited time here.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the rest of the questions that came into the chat box, we'll send it directly to Jiahui, and then or you can get in touch with her directly. According to the QR code that you have already scanned. But we will answer to you directly. We'll pass it on to her, and then she will make sure that she will answer that. Let's move on to the next and the last, but not least, the last session that we have on session. Yes. Let me introduce Dr. Cheong Meng Soon is a senior lecturer and research fellow in the School of Mechanical Engineering, University Technology Malaysia since 2017. His recent research focuses on life cycle assessment to assist industries in assessing their environmental load and impacts towards carbon neutrality and circular economy. He has been working closely with the National Institute of Advanced Industrial Science and Technology, Japan, on developing LCI data sets for various Malaysian industries, including the plastic industry. May I pass the floor to Dr. Cheong, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Viraj. Okay, can everyone see my screen, right?
Yes, we can, Dr. Cheong.
Okay, right, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk on what it means for plastic and climate change. So I myself come from university. I'm an academician, so all my life I'm working on research mostly. So here I'll give some thought on what does it mean for plastic and the climate change, and especially during this time where we are just recover from the COVID-19 pandemics. And the COVID-19 pandemics definitely teach us quite a few things. First, to fully move away from plastic is almost impossible. If it's not because of plastic that allow us to make all the PPE that we use throughout the pandemics, it wouldn't be over so fast. And second is it changed the way we live. Everything moved from the food delivery, from all the things that we'll be using throughout this pandemic period. So a lot of them are in fact made from plastic. So it will be there for a long time. In fact, our civilization built using plastic. In fact, it allows us to make so many advanced and all technological things that we'll be using. So at the same time, the topic of climate change is also start very fiercely, I would say, in this recent year. The global warming and all the plastic pollutant everyone may have heard entering the marine, the ocean, and so on. So all that, it just makes the plastic industry a bit difficult to move forward. And that there's obviously the element of environment and also climate change that need to be taken into consideration. So this is exactly what my presentation is intended to give a view on that from the research perspective. And specifically, I'll be going through three things. First is the climate change. So what are the causes? deep down what is the causes and the consequence. I think everyone know that, but what actually caused the change, the climate change, and secondly, how plastic actually contribute to that. Right, plastic is just plastic. We know that there's a lot of mismanaged plastic, but exactly how it contribute to climate change and how we can prevent that. So that come to the third topic that I'm going to talk about here, is what we can do to make sure that the plastic industry can move forward sustainably without the concern of environmental impact and also climate change. And let's start from the climate change alone. When we talk about climate change, the first thing we think about is the global warming, right? So in fact, the consequence is very obvious. In fact, the Earth global average temperature is increasing by almost 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade, right? From the Industrial Revolution in 1950s, the global Earth temperature has increased 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And if this carry on, the environmental impact is really huge. The climate are changing, that's for sure. The ice cap in the Arctic and Antarctica are melting. The sea level are increasing. Last month in MPMA, we're organizing a plastic tag month, and there is a series of talk about the sustainability. If the global warming trend continue to carry on like the rate as of right now, by 2050, a lot of the area in Malaysia will actually be underwater already, because the rate is not a constant increment, but in this 20 or 32 or 3 decade, the rate are definitely accelerating rather than slowing down or even decreasing. So the consequence is definitely serious. It affects everyone. It's everyone's responsibility to do something that can fix this problem. But exactly what caused the climate change? What really caused the climate change is the greenhouse gas emission, because the mechanism that lead to the temperature increment is in fact greenhouse effect. So once the greenhouse gas trapped within our atmosphere, it start to absorb heat from the sun, and therefore it remain the heat within the atmosphere, and therefore the temperature keep increasing. So that is perhaps the only mechanism for for global warming, and it's because of the greenhouse gas. And in 2020 alone, our world, despite of the pandemics, many places are locked down, many industries are in fact not working, we are still emit close over 30 gigaton of CO2 emission into the atmosphere. So this is a huge number. If it's not because of pandemic, it will be even higher. And the amount of CO2 that being emitted to the environment are actually keep increasing over the year. So what we have here on the right is almost like an average contributor of different industry and different sector on the CO2 emission. Energy, no doubt, is the largest contributor. Almost 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emission are actually from the energy. And it comes from the transportation, comes from the residential area, the electricity that we use on a daily basis, commercial, and a very big chunk, almost 24%, are actually from the industry. Of course, there are many different industries that contribute different level of emission. The smelting industry, iron, aluminum, metal industry, they generally contribute more, but that doesn't mean that the plastic industry doesn't contribute to that as well. And specifically, besides the energy, there are also industrial processes that not directly related to energy also contribute to the greenhouse gas CO2 emission here. And in total, industry sector probably contribute about 1/3 of the overall greenhouse gas emission. And as of right now, more than 100, I think over 100 definitely, that's for sure, of countries worldwide, including Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and also a lot of the European country, Japan, even United States, China will commit to achieving carbon neutrality by as soon as 2050, or some 2060. So within 20 or 30 years time, we are targeting to achieve that. And the idea is to, if we can't prevent the global warming, at least for now, the effect of global warming is definitely irreversible from our perspective right now. So if we can't reverse it, at least we need to slow it down. And hence the talk about net zero carbon, because achieving absolute zero carbon is pretty much impossible. At least we can achieve a net zero carbon. The trend would, the global warming trend wouldn't be accelerating like the rate that as of right now. So most of our, in fact, most of our Asia countries are target to achieve this by 2050. And how ready we Malaysia are for this, there is actually a good summary by KPMG. So here I'm just quoting them. So they rank Malaysia 21st among all the countries in the world, right behind China. In fact, China is 20th. So we are indeed quite ready for carbon neutrality, net zero carbon, for a few things. Sorry, we are not so in front because of our electricity mix. Electricity mix are still using fossil fuel basically, mostly. For Malaysia, we are using almost close to 40% of coal and another 40% by natural gas. So almost three-fourths of the electricity mix are still energy coming from fossil fuel. And the renewable energy is only about 20%. And the government has already set the milestone to bring the renewable energy up until 40 or 50% by 2030. And hopefully by 2050, we can have a fully renewable electricity grid. So that will definitely help a lot on achieving the net zero carbon. And in terms of the individual industry in that we can see on the side here for in Malaysia alone. So the readiness also differ from one another. For the industry level, the industry in Malaysia, the readiness is actually quite relatively high compared to other, including the transportation and the electricity. And that partly because our local industry, the Malaysian industry, are dealing a lot with the overseas customer. So they are in a way ahead of what the current situation is in Malaysia, because they are actually trying to meet the regulation in overseas. So despite most of the electricity mix are still fossil fuel based, the initiative of turning into green technology for the electricity definitely is a boost in this ranking here. And one thing about greenhouse gas, they are not all the same. When we talk about global warming, climate change, the indicator that help measure the climate change are what we call the global warming potential. So essentially, it tells how much the energy actually can be stored by the atmospheric gas over a period of time. And we measure that in relative to the CO2 or the carbon dioxide. So all the greenhouse gas, such as the one that some of them I list down here, the carbon dioxide, the methane, CH4, the nitrogen dioxide, N2O. So all these greenhouse gas, sometimes you may hear that the methane is more potent compared to the CO2. What that means is the greenhouse gas potential, global warming potential, GWP, is actually higher compared to CO2. Pretty simple, for the same amount of these two gas released to the environment, the CH4 can absorb 28 times higher energy compared to the CO2. And so therefore it can warm up the ambient much faster compared to, much greater compared to the CO2. And this global warming potential, or GWP we call it in short, usually are measured over a period of time. And usually we take it for 100 years. Therefore you heard the word GWP 100. But sometimes you may hear 20 years GWP as well. So that's like GWP 20. The reason for the time period is because all these greenhouse gases, they generally has a very long atmospheric lifetime as well, such as the one that I've shown below each of the gas here. The CO2 generally can last 50 to 200 years. So without doing anything to it or convert it to other gas, like what the plant can do, plant at least can convert CO2, it can't convert CH4. So if leave it on the atmospheric, it takes about this time for it to integrate by itself, disintegrate by itself into non-GHG. So understand that there is not just the CO2 alone will contribute to the global warming. The question now will come, exactly where the plastic or a plastic in its lifetime would actually contribute to climate change. Because after being made, the plastic itself will just stay this way, the same way as it looks. And even if we throw it away, it will last forever, pretty much. So exactly where it will contribute to all these greenhouse gases. So there are 4 that I list down here, which is the main source of climate change greenhouse gas emission that will come out within the plastic lifetime. So the first being at the very first stage of plastic life, which is from the extraction of the fossil fuel. Plastic is made from petroleum, so therefore the extraction process, the distillation process of the fossil fuel itself is an energy intensive process. And some studies suggest that the plastic industry itself accounts for 6% of the global oil consumption. And because the consumption of plastic is not reducing by any means, in fact, it's increasing. So by 2050, the energy we use to extract and distill the fossil fuel for plastic product will reach by 20%. That's what the estimation is. So this is by far one of the largest area that will contribute to the greenhouse gas from plastic. And the second one has something to do with the end-of-life treatment for plastic. So the mismanaged plastic, if we just leave it on the the environment, when exposed to the sunlight, it try to disintegrate it. So when that happens, it releases methane and ethylene. So this methane, as we've seen just now, which are the CH4, it is actually one of the greenhouse gas. So therefore, it will directly contribute to global warming. And PE, we use a lot of PE, we consume a lot of PE, is the most produced plastic in the world, perhaps, not only to Malaysia. Malaysia is definitely produced a lot. And as we already seen in the last presentation just now, right just now, the recycling rate for PE is not actually that high as well. So a lot of them, which means a lot of them are actually end up in the environment, and when exposed to sunlight, it starts to emit all these greenhouse gases. So the mismanaged plastic is definitely another source of greenhouse gas for the plastic in its lifetime. And in fact, the story doesn't stop there. The other 2 factors also mainly because of the inappropriate management of the plastic. Open burning, like it or not, is a very common waste treatment practice in Southeast Asia and also a lot of the developing country, not to mention all the underdeveloped country. So when the recycling industry doesn't have the capacity to cope with the amount of plastic waste or general solid waste even, including the plastic waste. So a lot of time they are just being burned openly. And we all know that when we start burning plastic, it starts to give out a lot of black smoke. And those carbon or PM, particulate matter, what we call it scientifically. So it leads to the visible smoke in the city. So when we have smoke like this, as we may experience in some years ago, all the smoke that we have around the Southeast Asia area because of the forest burning, it does make the climate heat up much faster. So that is definitely another source of the greenhouse gas. And the last one is that in the Earth, actually, when we talk about the carbon sink, or the sink that will actually convert CO2 back to oxygen, we think about tree, because that is the first thing that we can see that actually consumes CO2. But the truth is, the microorganism that found under the water, under the ocean, such as plankton, they are the one that actually help eliminate the CO2 in our atmosphere the most through their microorganism activity. And when we have mismanaged garbage, regardless what form, enter the ocean, become the marine waste, especially for plastic, because plastic can last for very long time. It doesn't disintegrate very easily. So all the plastic, when enter the ocean, it turn into microplastic, and this plankton can't able to differentiate it and will start to eat this microplastic. And what they end up is their ability to remove the CO2 will start to decrease. So not only we are release CO2 to the environment, the mismanaged waste that go into the ocean will actually reduce our capability, the carbon sink capability of the Earth. So all of that basically contribute to the global warming, or the climate change that we are talking about here. And if we look at all these 4 major causes, 3 of them are in fact from the end of life of the plastic, or the waste of the plastic waste are not being properly managed. And that is especially true in Southeast Asia, including Malaysia. We produce a lot of plastic waste. Just in 2019 alone, about 25% of our solid waste are actually made from plastic. And our very own Klang River is in fact the 3rd most polluted river among all the countries. And it's estimated that every year almost 73,000 tons of plastic are actually leaking into it. And in Malaysia, for the amount of the plastic waste that we are producing, only a handful of them are actually being recycled. We do recycle a lot, there's no doubt about it, but still almost 60% of it are actually leaking into the environment. And even though they are properly being collected and not leaked, not simply dumped into the roadside or the ocean, we in Malaysia pretty much don't have a second waste disposal mechanism other than landfill. So in the end, it still ends up in the environment. It's just that they are at least gathered in one place, but still the methane and the ethylene that it actually released when exposed to the sun, all that still apply. Not to mention when it rains, all the leaching from the landfill. So it still causes a lot of greenhouse gas and also environmental impact. And come to the million-dollar question. So what does it mean for plastic to move forward? And in the context of climate change. So everyone, I'm sure, heard about the circular economy. The plastic industry is trying very hard to achieve circular economy. So the obvious reason is the material will start to not leak into the environment. But because we've seen that 3 out from the 4 main causes of climate change from plastic was actually during its end of life stage. So it makes sense when we keep the material, or the plastic in this case, in use for much longer time and reduce the amount that actually go into the environment, we can almost certainly directly reduce the amount of greenhouse gas potential, or the global warming potential contributed by the plastic. And when we talk about circular economy, we are talking more than 3 out that we used to hear about. So what we've seen here is a very commonly used. This is called 6R. So rather than the conventional reduce, reuse, and recycling, there are more R's in here. So all this circular strategy is, in the end, the goal is to reduce the consumption of the natural resources, the raw material, keep the material in use as long as possible, increase their value, or maximize their value, I should say. And towards the end, if it's the time that to dispose it, at least we still need to make the full out from it rather than just landfill in the environment, perhaps like incinerator or waste to energy, in order to convert it back to use it to generate electricity. And recycling definitely is a big part in achieving the circular economy, but it is not the only factor that will make circular economy possible. So there are more definitely will need to be realized here in order for us to get to circular economy. And with this all new strategy coming in place, slowly, definitely, the business will lean towards this type of industry as well, such as the repair and remanufacturing, and also the R&D on the upstream on what kind of plastic material that can be best suited into this kind of circular economy rather than the conventional linear economy. And in order to realize circular economy and also to reduce the carbon footprint or the climate change potential, the global warming potential from plastic, that would also mean the plastic industry will spend more time to understand or spend more effort to keep track of the carbon footprint of a plastic. So understanding the carbon footprint of a plastic life cycle is definitely essential from now on, and everyone will be doing this more than ever before. And for good reason, it pinpoints the hotspot for the life cycle of a plastic. So on the right here is a very simple life cycle of a plastic bottle or mineral water from the raw material extraction of the plastic itself, the PET, to the distillation, and also the packaging, manufacturing, the supply chain, bottling, and go to the consumer, and towards the end, the disposal and recycling. Every stage of the cycle itself is emitting greenhouse gas, one type or the other, and all of that are actually contributing to the global warming potential. So we've seen 4 sources just now, and definitely throughout this lifetime, the lifetime of the plastic, there are more actually contributing. So identifying where the carbon footprint are actually coming from is very essential. So that helps the plastic manufacturer to know where they can actually improve. And there are many ways of achieving this circular economy and also the reducing the carbon footprint that eventually reduce the climate change. And for us as a researcher, so we always believe in a holistic solution. And that means we are a true believer in life cycle assessment. It's a systematic analysis that takes into account the entire life cycle of a product, not really just plastic, it could be any product, from the resource extraction all the way to manufacturing to the usage, and in the end, if it got recycled or is being disposed. So all of that will be considered, and we are looking at it from the potential environmental impact. So in the assessment itself, we can have many different categories of impact that we can look at, climate change being one of it. And when we talk about climate change, usually that also means the carbon footprint, so the global warming potential. And the good thing about having this kind of holistic model that can look at the entire life stages and also different impact category is that nowadays we are talking about the climate change, the global warming. Who knows, 20 years, 30 years down the road, we may start to look at other environmental impact. So by having a more sustainable solution or mathematical model that can allow us to cope with the future trend will always be important. Life cycle assessment itself is not a very complicated analysis. In fact, there's only 4 steps, like the 4 boxes you've seen on the right here. We need to define the scope, define the goal properly, and then we do the inventory analysis. We collect the data, the activity data, and then from there we can run the impact assessment, and then from there we can interpret the result. So the analysis itself is straightforward, but it's a very data intensive, and the quality of the result, the prediction, is very heavily reliable on the data that we have on hand. So specifically, we are talking about 2 types of data: the foreground data, which we call the foreground, and the background data. The foreground data is the activity data. Let's say a product manufacturer are actually practicing how much resource they are using, how much electricity they are using, how much resin they are using. or what type of resin they are actually using for, in the case for plastic. So all that will be needed in order for us to estimate how much the carbon footprint it actually emit throughout the process. The tricky part about CO2 or CO2 equivalent is that it is not visible, and most of the time is not measurable as well. It's always to the best of the estimation, and to how best the estimation can be is all relying on the background data. So these are the trial study that being made into the database where this foreground data can look up for in order for us to estimate the greenhouse gas. And many of the background data are actually commercial based. Some of the developed countries, they have started this in 90s or even early 2000s. So they have a relatively strong background data in order to support the life cycle assessment in their country. However, their data is always limited to their country. So if we use the same background data, it only means that we know the carbon footprint if the product are actually being made in, let's say, United States, if we are using their database. So this is the tricky part for a country like us, Malaysia or Southeast Asia to be general, to come up with this kind of analysis in order to understand the situation of our own country here, because we are lagging behind in developing this kind of database. So in order for us to succeed, it definitely will take everyone's contribution to build out the database, and also only then we can run this kind, we can do this kind of assessment. And as part of the effort in achieving this or enable the LCA study in the future, so we actually came out with MPMA to come out with the database that can support the future LCA study for at least for the Malaysia industry. And specifically, we'll be looking at establishing the LCA dataset that usable for the Malaysia industry, reflecting the practice in Malaysia, such as how we make the plastic product and how we treat the plastic towards the end of its life. And that allows us to run the environmental impact, and also to develop a necessary tool in the future to monitor all the regulation that we need to meet, and hope sooner or later the regulation will come. We have to do the carbon reporting. So this is initiative that to come out with a tool that will be able to benefit the industry in terms of this aspect. And it's a bad time that we started. It was during the midst of COVID-19. So now everything start to get back to activity. The activity start to resume. So we are hoping that this could be achieved in a 2 years time from now on. And last but not least, I would like to end the presentation with what we call the critical success factor for carbon neutrality and also circular economy. And when it comes to environmental related topics, there is no doubt that the strongest factor that would actually decide a success or failure is the commitment from the individual, in fact. Individual as in the personal or the company or the industry itself. Because it involves changing the thinking from deep down. For instance, to achieve the circular economy, the supply chain of the company, of the manufacturer itself, it needs to be in the perspective of circular thinking. Every decision they make, rather than just thinking of, can it be cheaper? Can we make the profit higher? Now it starts to need to think about the element of, does it benefit the environment, or does it do any harm to the environment? That very often also mean that they will need to change their product design. And in the plastic month last month, we already see a lot of the resin manufacturers actually come out with a very innovative type of resin, which allowed actually include the circular thinking into it. And a lot of the machine manufacturer also have a complete package of machine that can support this circular economy. So in that sense, it's actually, at least the big players are adopting this type of circular thinking already. But we also have a lot of small to medium manufacturers around Southeast Asia especially. So for all of them to change, in the end of the day, whether this reducing carbon, achieving net zero carbon can succeed or not. Besides the legislation coming from the government, the commitment from the leadership and the management will play a big role here. And sooner or later, the legislation from the government will come. In fact, we also hear from the Department of Environment the other day that Malaysia, that they have already on the plan to come out with the framework on how to gear the industry towards the circular economy. So sooner or later, the legislation will come, and it is better for the industry to prepare ahead of that legislation, and therefore can adapt that very, very nicely. And last and not least is the contribution from the research will also play a big role. Take a simple example, the chemical recycling that everyone are discussing just now. Conventionally, yes, it's not a very environmental friendly method, but with the strong interest from developed countries like Korea and Japan, there are changes they will make. And in the end of the day, it might be a more favorable method because let's say it can probably handle a laminated plastic. So hybrid plastic, right now, there's no way for us to recycle it. So there are some good points in the technology that wasn't so popular from historically. Now that with the R&Ds, it will probably become a more favorable option in the future. So the funding for the R&D, either from the government or also from the private sector, the company. So that would be also a key driver in order for this to be net zero carbon and circular economy to be a success. And with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cheong.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cheong, for the presentation.
Thank you.
So before we proceed with the last Q&A session, in appreciation to Messe Düsseldorf for sponsoring the conference, we will now play their corporate video. Thank you once again to Messe Düsseldorf for supporting the conference today. So now, before we begin the last Q&A session for the day, we would actually like to run a short poll to assess the conference. So this will help the Secretariat to understand the areas of improvement for our future conferences. Therefore, we urge the attendees to please kindly participate and give us your feedback so that we can continue to provide good content for you through our webinars and conferences. There are only 8 questions, short questions, so we really appreciate your feedback. Please don't be shy. Your feedback would really be helpful to us. We have 98 attendees here now remaining on the call. Therefore, if we could at least get half of you to provide us with your feedback, that will be much appreciated. We now have 20, 21, 23 participants who had provided feedback. So let's keep that coming in. Okay, we are at 44 right now. Okay, we have reached about 51% of you who had participated. So we will stop the poll right now. Thank you very much for your feedback. We hope that with your feedback, we can offer you a better content in the future. So with that, I will pass the session to Kun Virat to start the last Q&A session for the day.
Crystal. Yes, I have two questions from the chat box. One of them is, first question is, please elaborate how Malaysia will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Is it a realistic target?
Okay, for Malaysia to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 sounds like a long reach, to be honest, because 80% of our electricity grid are still based on fossil fuel. But at least it's a target they are after, and there are plans to stop building all the fossil fuel power plant and start all the expansion from now on are based on renewable energy. So it's difficult for me to say that is impossible or possible even, but it's always good to set the target further than we can actually achieve. So hopefully by then we are not too far from net zero by then.
Okay, the next questions will be, how large do you estimate the LCA results will differ between US data and Malaysia data, for example?
Again, on this, I don't have a concrete number. Hopefully in a 1 or 2 years time, when we finish building the basic database, we should able to give a more solid answer for this. Just by the look at it, it should differ quite a bit, because first the electricity grid that we are using, the energy mix that we are using to generate our electricity. So that alone will carry a big weight, because 75% of the CO2 emission are actually coming from energy sector. So logically speaking, electricity will still be the biggest contributor in the carbon footprint of any plastic product in Malaysia as well. And the electricity grid of our nation actually decide a big chunk of the carbon footprint of plastic product. And not to mention the way the supply chain here works. A lot of our items are actually, let's say, because the fuel price is relatively cheap in Malaysia compared to in US. So in our case here, probably the supply chain itself, the company from, let's say, Southern Malaysia will get it from Northern Malaysia. The cost probably is not too expensive for them to bear, but the carbon footprint actually associated with it are actually quite big. So there are many factors that play into how big the difference would be between other nation and Malaysia. So at least for now, we foresee it will be relatively big.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I have one question for you. Can achieving net zero carbon reduce the Earth's global average temperature?
To be honest, it won't, because achieving net zero will only means that we slow down the rate of global warming. In order to really bring down the global temperature, theoretically, we need to start creating oxygen and feed it back to the environment, or carbon negative, we call it. So, yeah, to answer that, achieving net zero will not actually lower the global temperature. We can only slow down the warming. But at least that's the first thing we need to achieve. We need to stop the bleeding before we start to cure it.
Okay. Any more questions? Didn't see any hand raised. So I would say that I think for today, thank you, Dr. Cheong. I think all the questions have been completed.
Thank you.
Thank you. For today, the sessions, the three sessions that we have, I think they are very, very informative, and I think it's excellent information that we have. And I hope that everyone has benefited from what we heard from our speakers. I would say that we would like, on behalf of ASEAN Plastic Federation Industry, AFPI, we would like to express our sincere appreciation to the speakers, as well as the APF, Asia Plastic Forum Secretary, for making this a success meeting, or success conference, really. And thanks to everyone for attending this, and hope that we all get the information and make use of it. Okay, thank you very much, and stay safe. I would pass it back to Callum, the Secretariat of Asia Plastic Forum, to say a few words. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Khun Viraj. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Hope all of you enjoy the session, and thank you again to all the speakers for your input, and of course thank you to Khun Viraj for doing a great job. I didn't see anybody nodding their head and all that, so that means everything is good. Till we meet again, and let's see what we can do for the next session. Again, like I say, we will debate what are the issues which is current, and what are those things which really matters to us. We want to make sure that the platform we provide is good, that people value the input, the speakers, the topic, and also, most important, like I say, you have good take-home values, and that we all learn from it. And more importantly, let's stay safe. The opportunities are all there. The rebound is happening, and don't wait. Because I think many of us keep on holding back, not daring to go out, worry about this and that. Not wrong, but at the end of the day, life goes on. So I hope all of us will look at things from a positive angle. Be prepared, take precaution, wear your double mask if necessary, do your social distancing, do whatever needs to be done to protect you and your family. But at the end of the day, don't let your company die. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. You've been a very good guest, and till we meet again, thank you. And also, before I conclude, thank you again to the AFPI and APF Secretariat, led by Metawi and the team from AFPI. And thanks again to Sujata, Chris, and the team from the APF Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kun Virat.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.